Okay, if you started with P is equal to BR and you solve for B by dividing each side by R, you would get B is equal to P over R, and that's A. If you started with P is equal to BR and you solve for R, you'd divide each side by B and you'd get R is equal to P over B, and that's actually that's not there, and you know that we already solved for P. We know that it's BR. It's not going to be this, so that can't be this. This can't be true because it's the other way around. And when we solve for B, we know that it's P over R, not R over P, so that's not true. So the only choice that works is A. Okay, if we start with our M is equal to F over A, and you multiplied by A on each side, that would cancel, and you'd be left with F is equal to MA or AM. Either way, multiplication is commutative. So when we look at this, F is equal to MA, that choice works. So that means we know it's not this and we know it's not this. And if we were to solve this equation for A, we could divide each side by M, and that would give us that A is equal to F over M. That means that this cannot be true, so that's gone. So the only choice that works is D. Okay, we want to ultimately find P, so we're going to solve this equation for this variable P. So we have big PV over T is equal to little pv over T. Then I'm going to multiply each side by T in order to cancel that, and I'm also going to divide each side by V in order to get rid of that. So our equation is going to be little p is equal to big PV little t over big T little v. And then we're going to plug in values. P is 50, V is 9, little t is 350, over big T is 300, and little v is 8. So I'm going to just grab a calculator, and I have 50 times 9 times 350 is 157,500 over 300 times 8 is 2,400, and this comes out to 66.625. Now, in order for me to put the units on here, actually there are no units in this problem, so that would just be my little p. And that's it. Okay, we're going to solve for L. So if we start with C is equal to 100B over L, we can start by multiplying each side by L, and I'll put it in alphabetical order here. So I'll get CL, same thing as LC, is equal to, this cancels, so I have 100B. And then if I'm solving for L, I'll divide it by C, and I'll get L is equal to 100B over C. So that's the formula. Now, I'm going to start plugging in values. C is 80, and B is 5. And I'll just use a calculator. 100 times 5 divided by 80 is 6.25. And notice there's no units in here, so there's no units on the answer. And that's it. Okay, we want to solve this formula for G. So F is equal to G big M little m over D squared. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of D squared. So I'm going to multiply each side by D squared. And that's going to cancel those. So now I've got D squared F is equal to G big M little m. And I'm solving for G, so I want to get rid of these. I'll divide them out. And I got to do that on both sides. So my final answer is G is going to be equal to d squared f over big M little m. And that's it. Okay, I want to solve for a, which is in the denominator here. So I'm going to get rid of all my denominators. So I have three fractions here, and so my least common denominator is the product of all three, a, b, c. So I'm going to take my 1 over a, and I'll multiply that by a, b, c. That's equal to my 1 over b, and I'm going to multiply that by a, b, c, plus my 1 over c, and I'm going to multiply that by a, b, c. In other words, I'm just taking each term in this fraction and I'm multiplying by the LCD so that I get rid of my denominators. So this one, the a's cancel, this one, the b's cancel, and here the c's cancel. So what we're left with is BC is equal to AC plus plus AB. Now, I'm solving for A, and right now A is showing up in two terms. So to isolate it, I have to factor it out. So this is going to be, I'm going to say A times C plus B. And finally, if you want to solve for this, you have to divide this out. We're going to have to divide each side by C plus B. And we're going to get A is equal to BC over C plus B. And that's it. Okay, here I'm solving for V. And so, you know, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of my fraction. So I'm going to multiply by my LCD, which is T. Actually, you know, an easier way to think about it is when you have a single fraction is equal to another single fraction, you can cross multiply. So I'm going to do that, and I'll get PV little t is equal to PV big T. All I did was cross multiply. That's the exact same answer you'd get if you multiplied this fraction by this and this fraction by this and cancel. It's just an easier way to think about it. Now we're after this little variable here. So to solve for it, I got to divide by P big T. And here they cancel, so we'll have V is equal to PV little t over little pt. Exaggerate the size of your variables so that you don't think that this is the same thing as that, because they're not the same thing. Okay, we're solving for this little r here. So I'm going to write this, I is equal to, I'm going to give myself a little more room than this. I is equal to n big E over r plus n r. Now, I'm going to get rid of this denominator here by multiplying each side by that denominator. So I'll multiply it here, and I'll multiply it here. And then here they cancel, so I'm left with NE is equal to, and then I'm going to distribute this I through, and I'll get IR plus INR, like that. Now, we're after R, so we're after this term. So I'm going to move this term over to the other side, and it's an addition subtraction, so it's just going to flip signs when I do that. So I'll have INR is equal to NE minus IR. And finally, I'm after this R, so I got to divide away the IN. So I divide it on both sides. And I'll write my answer up here. So R is going to be equal to NE minus IR all over IN. And that's it. Okay, we're after B, which is in the parentheses. There's lots of ways to do this, but what I'm going to do is eliminate my parentheses. So I'm going to, what you do is you're going to distribute this here, but just think of these as over 1. And when you distribute this, you're going to say A is equal to, now when I multiply this times this, I'm multiplying 1 times H times B to get the top. And I'm multiplying 2 times 1 times 1 to get the bottom. And then when I'm multiplying by this term, I'm multiplying 1 times h times big B to get the top, and I'm multiplying 2 times 1 times 1 to get the bottom. So now I've broken up the parentheses. And if you follow this, if you do parentheses, fractions, simplify, isolate, and divide, you'll get through all of these. So I did the parentheses, and now I'm going to do the fractions, so I'll multiply each of these terms by 2. And I'll get 2a is equal to, the 2's cancel here, and the 2's cancel there. So that was the fractions. Simplify means you combine like terms with there not any. Isolate means to isolate the term that you're after. I'm after the one with the little b, so I want to move this one over, and that's just going to flip signs when you do that. So I'll have 2a minus hb is equal to hb. And finally, your last step is to divide. I'm going to divide out the h on each side. And I'm going to get b is equal to 2a minus hb all over h. And that's it. Okay, so, I was following my little 5-step plans. Parentheses, fractions, simplify, isolate, and divide. There's no parentheses, so I can skip that. But there are fractions, and so I'm going to there's a single fraction equal to a single fraction, I can cross multiply. When I multiply this way, I get ER. When I multiply this way, I'm going to distribute this through here, and I'll get E big R plus E little r. So that was the fractions. Simplify means you're combining like terms, and we don't have any, so we just skip it. Isolate means to isolate the term with the variable that we're after. Well, there's 2 terms. So we want to isolate these 2, so I'm going to move this one over and I'll leave this one behind. So when I move this over, it flips signs. It becomes a negative. Now, the variable that we're solving for shows up in multiple terms, and that's fine. You isolate it by factoring it out. Oops, e minus little e. And finally, so we've isolated it, and finally divide is the last step. So in order to solve for this, we've got to divide out this. So we just divide it on each side. So we're going to get R is equal to ER over E minus E. And that's it. Okay, we're going to use a proportion to solve this. So there's always going to be 2 situations. You make one fraction from each of the situations and make them equal to each other. That's a proportion. So let's do this. In mathematics class, 3 of every 4 students are girls. So what we have are girls to total students, okay? And there's 3 girls to every 4 students. That's the first situation. The second situation says there's 28 students. So you have to remember, I put this on the side to remind myself that students is on the bottom of this fraction. So on the bottom, I'll put 28. And the question is, how many girls? So I'll put my X, or you could have put a G if you want over there, okay? So then I'm going to cross multiply. And I have 4x is equal to 3 times 28. Let me just grab a calculator. And I get 112. Then I'll divide each side by 4. And I'll get x is equal to 28. Now, if you didn't want to use, so we know that there's 28 girls. But what I wanted to show you is if you didn't have a calculator and you didn't want to do this, when you do this multiplication, you can just say 4x is equal to 28 times 3. You don't actually have to do the multiplication because you're about to divide by 4, and then you can cancel. 4 goes into this 7 times. Oh, I have a mistake somewhere because this should be 21. X would be 21 here. I think I just made some weird math here, so let me double check my math here. I have 28 times 3. Oh, I'm sorry, this should have been an 84. And then when you divide by 4, 84 divided by 3, that's 21. It's a good thing I checked it. But anyway, you didn't have to do any of the multiplication until, you could cancel to make your multiplication much easier so you could do it in your head. Okay, so we're going to set up a proportion here. The first set of facts is from this right here. Marin can mow her yard in 2 hours. In other words, she can do one job in 2 hours. That means how many jobs can she do in 1 hour? So when we cross multiply, we get 2x is equal to 1 times 1, which is 1, and we divide by 2 and we get x is equal to a half. So she can do a half of a job per hour. Okay, we're going to use a proportion to solve this. So it says that biologists tagged 500 fish on January 1, and on February 1 they returned all the fish and collected a random sample of 400 fish. 8 of them had been previously tagged. Okay, so now approximately how many fish does a lake have based on the experiment? Well, think about this. None of the fish were tagged before they did this, and so they caught and tagged 500 fish. So we're going to put a little ratio, tagged over total. Okay, so right now 500 fish have been tagged out of a total number of fish in the population. We don't know how many that is, but later they went and they caught a sample population. 8 of them have been tagged over a total of 400 that they caught. So in other words, this ratio represents the whole population, and this ratio represents the population of the fish caught the second time. And these are got to be in proportion to each other. So we're just going to solve this by cross multiplying, and we'll get 8x is equal to 500 times 400, and then we'll divide each side by 8. And I'm just going to cross multiply. 8 goes into 45 times, so it goes into 450 times. And this cancels. So x is going to be equal to 500 times 50, which is 25,000. So there are roughly 25,000 fish in the pond. Okay, so we want to know if Bruce Johnson's car uses 5 gallons of gas to go 156 miles, how many gallons of gas will he need to drive 300 miles? Okay, so let's do this. We're going to put gallons over miles. And we have 5 gallons of gas drives 156 miles. That's the first situation. And the second situation is how many gallons to drive 300 miles. So I'm going to put x over 300. And I'll cross multiply. This is 156x is equal to 1,500. Oop, that's 15,000. And then I'm going to divide each side by 156. And I'm going to get x is equal to, I'll just grab a calculator. And I get 9.6. That's how much gas he needs in total, but this question says that he already has 3 gallons of gas in the car. So how much more gallons would he need? So if you take out the 3 gallons he already has, he's going to need 6.6 more gallons. So 6.6 more gallons of gas. And that's it.